This is SlimeVR, the long-awaited project that takes everything you know about full body tracking and throws it out the window. Slime trackers are less expensive, work with multiple headsets, and have no issues with occlusion. With that being said, I've also heard a lot of concerns about ease of use, calibration, and tracking quality. And yes, I know the waitlist sucks, but the first batches of slime trackers are shipping now. I received this press kit from the slime team with no strings attached. With this in hand, SlimeVR finally feels like a real product. While I may not be the first to review it, I'd like to focus on one question. Will SlimeVR work for you? Because look, I don't know if this is the perfect solution for everyone. There are some compromises and points of friction, especially for new users. However, after spending a little extra time with Slime, early frustrations gradually turned around into cautious optimism and excitement. This is going to make full body tracking much more affordable, at a quality that's perfectly fine for casual usage. So first, what exactly is a slime tracker? They are essentially a battery, a microcontroller, and an IMU, our inertial measurement unit. The IMU packs an array of sensors for reporting movement data. The tracker is attached to your body through Velcro straps, and each slime tracker can be extended with an extra IMU through a wire for an additional point of tracking. The Slime server software connects all these trackers via Wi-Fi, takes their measurements, and generates an internal 3D model of your body. Through the sensor data from the IMU and some mathematics, your body's movements are applied onto that model. This is then converted into emulated trackers for SteamVR, OSC data for VRCHAT, or used for motion capture. In my opinion, the biggest motivation to try SlimeVR is its low price point. Judging by Slime's crowdfunding campaign, there's a huge demand for less expensive full body tracking. These kits aren't cheap by any means, but since you don't need to buy any extra straps or lighthouses, the cost is typically less expensive than other solutions. In addition, most popular trackers require laser shooting lighthouses to triangulate their position. None of the new Quest headsets use these, it's all inside out tracking with cameras. Putting a camera and processor in every tracker is pretty expensive too. Lighthouse systems also don't work when the trackers are occluded, meaning they're covered up in some way. This is annoying if you've ever tried to use a blanket in VR, but I think the real benefit comes from avoiding lighthouse dead spots. IMUs don't care because they don't have to see anything to work. The battery life is really good here too. Lastly, SlimeVR is an open source project. This benefits both the software and the DIY community. You can build your own slime trackers at home, and for the sake of comparison, I did this too. Built to a similar spec as the official trackers, these work just as well. However, using different devices or IMUs may not have the same tracking quality, so let's stick to the official ones for this review. The first step is just to install the Slime server software. Connecting trackers through Wi-Fi and assigning them to points on the body is a very straightforward and well-guided process. However, there's unfortunately one issue that I had to address right out of the gate. My initial tracker latency was terrible, resulting in ping spikes and inconsistent performance. At first, I thought my router was overwhelmed with VR streaming, but I tried swapping to a wired headset and that did nothing. It turns out some 2.4 GHz Wi-Fi channels were congested in my apartment complex. I solved this by changing the channel on my Wi-Fi router. This isn't anything wrong with SlimeVR, just make sure you have good Wi-Fi signal strength. But once you get that set up, you're not out of the woods yet. We still have to tackle the biggest hurdle for new users. Calibration. First, every slime tracker needs to be turned on while placed on a flat surface. This prevents drift and must be done every time you turn them on. Several times I've made the mistake of putting on all my trackers only to have to take them all off for proper orientation. After you get the trackers strapped to your body, you need to do two poses for detecting their mounting directions. The software does try to support all sorts of positions, but some directions are more recommended than others. The next part is where things get a little more tricky. You will need to record a series of motions in 30 seconds or under to determine your body proportions. This certainly feels a bit goofy at first. Overall, my first attempts at calibration were rough. I was unsure of my poses and movements, hadn't tweaked any settings yet, and no matter how many times I tried, I failed to get that one-for-one movement that makes full body tracking fully immersive. It was only after some extra research and the documentation and going to the SlimeVR calibration meetup that I learned some of the issues holding me back. The quick start setup in the software does not have a visual guide to the calibration motions. This can lead people to interpret the text prompt into their own version of the dance. But I think for the best results, just follow the documentation. Other tweaks involved adjusting the calibration range and play space height. The most common issue I ran into was referred to as mermaiding. This is when your virtual legs cross over primarily when sitting down, while your real legs are close together. I did try to move my trackers on the outside of my ankles as suggested, but the true fix is in the automatic mounting process. In my experience, this needs to be pretty precise to avoid this issue. Also, watch where your trackers are attaching to your model. Big paws can clip easily, and that's obviously not Slime's problem. Overall, there's just a lot of room for error and experimentation in this process, which can impact your overall consistency. In my opinion, this is the biggest compromise of SlimeVR. Now, when everything is working correctly, I am genuinely impressed with how good the tracking can look. It can be very difficult to tell it apart from other solutions, especially when you're only looking at the digital model. Now, you can still get some floatiness, but as long as the internal model doesn't glitch out, it looks pretty good for what it is. You can even smooth your motions at the cost of a slight delay or use a predictive algorithm to help improve the result. Now, you may notice your trackers shift out of place, no matter how good your initial calibration was. That's the other weakness of IMU tracking: drift. IMUs are not perfect, and they tend to shift position from where they should be over time. This is more common on less expensive trackers with lower quality IMUs, but personally I found the drift issue not that bad with the official trackers. It's lessened by how quickly you can reset, so as long as you don't mind posing once in a while, I didn't find this to be a massive deal breaker. Now, unfortunately, I did have one issue with the actual hardware while testing this kit. 2 of my extension cables broke in the exact same place. One cable for my foot tracker and one for my hip. I noticed that the hip tracker cable had folded over and compressed near the end of the connector, and there was some tension on the foot tracker due to the ankle tracker moving from front to side mounting. These cables just don't feel like the most durable choice. Try to avoid tension on that one specific spot of the connector, but maybe you should just get the full trackers if you're going to be super active. Speaking of, how many trackers should you get? Personally, I feel like 5, 6, or 8-point tracking is the sweet spot for cost and benefit. There is very little competition at the sub $200 price point, and for a little bit more, you can get 3 extra extensions to fill in some of that extra detail and rotation on your feet and hip. The next level up is the full body kit. This is basically the elbow tracking DLC and the version that I got in my review kit. I personally don't find elbows worth the extra hassle and cost. While it is nice to have some control over this, it's not something I typically wear casually. The value per price starts to weaken here. The 16-point tracking setup is mostly for mocap users and people who want to capture movement outside of VR. This is something I'd be curious about experimenting with, as primarily for VTubing. The advanced limit is 20 points of tracking, which I can only imagine a few crazy VTubers, animators, and tinkerers needing this many trackers to capture motion data without a VR headset. SlimeVR's low price point, hardware compatibility, and other unique benefits make it an enticing option for full body tracking. The room for error in initial calibration adds a steep learning curve for beginners and can lead to somewhat inconsistent final results. You will need to experiment and have patience. If you need precision or aren't willing to deal with the calibration, I wouldn't blame anyone for putting their money towards a lighthouse setup. But for regular VRCHAT players, Quest users, and entry-level VTubers, SlimeVR adds a ton of extra movement to your avatar at a fraction of the cost. It has unique perks that make it more convenient than lighthouses in some cases. So in a way, SlimeVR is helping to bring full body tracking to everyone, at least those willing to deal with its quirks.